We usually think of the global economy as this vast, invisible digital cloud. Like you tap a screen on your phone,
Yeah.
money moves halfway across the world, a stock price ticks up, an algorithm quietly adjusts the price.
Right.
And because it's so seamless, it
hmm
just feels entirely detached from the physical world.
Yeah, I mean, it creates this illusion that modern finance just exists on servers in a vacuum,
Yeah.
completely insulated from geography or weather or physical friction.
Exactly. But then you see a piece of footage of an American-guided missile destroyer firing actual artillery rounds into the engine room of a massive cargo ship.
Yeah, that'll do it.
And suddenly, that invisible digital cloud just evaporates. You are jarringly reminded that the entire global financial system, everything from the cryptocurrency sitting in your digital wallet to the interest rate on your mortgage, is actually bolted down to the very physical, very fragile movement of steel boxes floating across the ocean.
It's all connected.
Right? So welcome to the deep dive. We know you are joining us today because you want to get smart on this incredibly complex web of news without, drowning in the sheer volume of information.
Yeah.
And I have to say, our stack of sources today is
It
wild.
really is. We're watching basically a live action demonstration of how a single physical bottleneck can trigger a massive domino effect across completely disparate industries.
Which is exactly our mission today. We're going to follow that chain reaction for you. We're going to explore how a physical blockage in global trade over in the Middle East instantly triggers whiplash in the digital markets, fuels some pretty unprecedented drama at the Federal Reserve, exposes serious ethical blind spots in the halls of Congress, and ultimately empowers the invisible algorithms tracking your personal wallet.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. So let's unpack this by starting at that physical choke point. What is actually happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now?
Well, the situation is, it's a masterclass in geopolitical whiplash. We are looking at a complete 180-degree reversal from just a day prior.
Wait, literally one day.
Literally 24 hours. So only 24 hours after a reopening of the strait was publicly announced by President Trump and Iran's foreign minister, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC stepped in.
Okay.
And they suddenly declared the Strait of Hormuz closed again to all ships. This abrupt closure is the physical catalyst that's driving global markets into an absolute frenzy today.
And the response from the U.S. hasn't just been like a strongly worded diplomatic memo, right? It has been intensely physical.
Oh, absolutely.
According to the sources we've compiled, the U.S. Navy has established a hard blockade just outside the strait. And over the past week, they have already turned back 27 different ships trying to enter or exit Iranian ports.
27 ships, that's a massive disruption.
Right. But it's the seizure of one specific ship, the Tuska, that seems to have completely changed the temperature in the water. Walk us through what happened there.
Right. So the Tuska is an Iranian cargo ship that actively attempted to evade this U.S.-imposed blockade in the Gulf of Oman. And the timeline of the escalation is really what you need to pay attention to here.
Okay, lay it out.
The captain of the Tuska reportedly ignored multiple direct radio warnings from the Americans to halt their advance. They kept steaming full speed toward the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas.
So they just called the bluff.
Exactly.
So how does the Navy respond without, starting a full-scale war?
Well, the U.S. guided missile destroyer, the Spruance, ordered the Tuska's crew to evacuate their engine room.
Wow.
Yeah, and once the area was clear, the Spruance fired several Mk-45 rounds directly into the cargo ship's propulsion system.
Which is an incredibly calculated move, right? I mean, they didn't blow the ship out of the water.
Far from it. The Mk-45 is a naval artillery gun. By specifically targeting the propulsion system, the U.S. Navy deliberately chose to cripple the vessel rather than sink it.
Right.
It is a very precise escalation of force. You disable the ship, you enforce the blockade, and you send a massive deterrent message, all while trying to avoid the massive casualties that would come from sinking a commercial freighter.
That makes sense. And now, U.S. Marines have actually boarded the disabled vessel, and they're in the process of physically searching as many as 5,000 shipping containers on board.
Yeah. Which is just...
Trying to search 5,000 containers bobbing in the ocean sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It's unheard of.
And the military is saying the crew will eventually be returned to Iran, and they're figuring out what to do with the crippled ship itself. Maybe tow it to Oman or let it limp back to an Iranian port if the engine can be salvaged at all.
Right.
But the message to the shipping industry has clearly been received loud and clear. One retired vice admiral put it bluntly in our sources. He said most ships are simply not wanting to go out there right now.
And you can't blame them.
No. Which brings us to the immediate global panic metric, which is the price of oil.
Yeah.
Oil futures jumped 7% on this news. We are climbing back over $95 a barrel as investors are basically staring down a pivotal Wednesday evening deadline
Hmm.
for a U.S.-Iran ceasefire.
Yeah.
Now, I keep seeing this $95 number everywhere in the financial notes. Why is that specific dollar amount setting off alarm bells? If the Strait of Hormuz is the world's most critical artery of trade, aren't we just one miscalculation away from oil prices fundamentally breaking the global economy?
That is exactly the fear. That $95 mark operates as a massive psychological threshold for institutional investors, and it comes down to this concept of a risk premium.
Okay, explain that.
Well, the Strait of Hormuz isn't just a convenient shipping lane. It is a fundamental bottleneck for a massive percentage of the entire world's energy supply.
Right.
When you have actual artillery rounds being fired to physically enforce a military blockade, the market has to immediately price in the possibility of a total supply cutoff. Markets hate uncertainty, generally, but they absolutely loathe physical disruptions to energy.
Because it bleeds into literally everything else.
Exactly. It acts as an immediate, unavoidable tax on the global economy. If fuel costs spike, the cost of manufacturing goods spikes. The cost of putting those goods on a truck spikes. So that 7% jump in oil isn't just a number on a trader's screen. It translates directly to higher prices for everyday consumers, and it acts as a massive drag on economic growth.
And, that fear did not just stay contained to traditional commodities markets. This is where the story gets really interesting to me.
Oh, yeah.
Because the physical reality of the artillery fire in the Middle East immediately hammered the digital markets over the weekend.
Total whiplash.
I was looking at the cryptocurrency charts before this news broke, and it felt like XRP in particular was having a massive breakout moment.
It was.
What was actually driving that upward momentum before the crash hit?
Well, the timing of the geopolitical shock was just incredible because the crypto markets were seeing very specific catalyst-driven momentum that had nothing to do with global politics.
Right.
Before the Hormuz news dropped, XRP hit $1.51 on Friday. That was its highest point since mid-March, and it was significantly outperforming both Bitcoin and Ethereum. And the underlying momentum was being driven by major, tangible institutional integrations.
So real-world adoption, not just, like, internet hype.
Correct. You had Rakuten Wallet rolling out integration to its 44 million users over in Japan.
44 million, yeah.
You had a major operational deal struck in Korea between Ripple and Kyobo Life. And on top of that, we saw massive whale accumulation.
Let's pause there for a second. Define whale accumulation for those of us who aren't, staring at crypto order books all day.
Sure.
Why does that matter more than everyday retail traders buying in?
So a whale in financial terms is simply an entity holding a massive amount of a specific asset. Think large-scale institutional investors or massive crypto funds.
Okay.
When whales accumulate an asset, it signals deep institutional confidence because they aren't day trading, they're taking long-term positions. And whale accumulation for XRP had just hit a 10-month high, with these large entities buying up roughly 11 million XRP per day.
11 million a day. But then the physical domino falls.
Yep.
The IRGC announces the strait is closed, the oil spikes to $95, and the digital dominoes immediately fall right with it. Bitcoin slipped down to the $74,000 to $75,000 range.
Huge drop.
And XRP dropped roughly 6%, falling to $1.43. Although I see in the notes here that XRP is currently managing to hold above its 50-day moving average support level at $1.38.
Right.
Again, translating for the listener here. Why does a 50-day moving average act as a support level?
Well, a 50-day moving average is exactly what it sounds like. It's the average price of the asset over the last 50 trading days.
Okay.
Technical analysts look at this as a psychological floor. If an asset's price drops but bounces off that average and stays above it, it suggests the long-term upward trend is still intact despite the short-term panic. It shows that buyers are willing to step in when the price dips to that historical average.
And we're seeing this wild volatility rippling into corporate crypto plays, too. Look at MicroStrategy, ticker symbol MSTR. They are famously the world's largest corporate holder of Bitcoin.
Right, huge player.
Our sources note their stock is currently sitting in what analysts call overbought territory, with its relative strength index, or RSI, up in the 70s. What does an RSI in the 70s actually tell us about a stock?
So the relative strength index measures the speed and magnitude of recent price changes. When an RSI goes above 70, the market considers the asset overbought, meaning the prices run up too high too fast.
Ah, okay.
It's usually driven by euphoria and is primed for a pullback. MicroStrategy's RSI shot up heavily due to Bitcoin's run up to $77,000 earlier on.
But here is the crazy part to me. Despite being overbought based on recent momentum, MicroStrategy's stock is still down nearly 8% year to date. How does that math even work?
I know, it sounds counterintuitive. It highlights the massive disconnect between an underlying asset and the corporate wrapper holding it. MicroStrategy functions almost like a leverage bet on Bitcoin. But because it's a publicly traded company, its stock price is also subjected to broader stock market forces, interest rates, and investor sentiment regarding the company's debt strategy to actually buy that Bitcoin.
Oh, that makes sense.
Mm.
Even with that volatility, though, we are seeing Bernstein analysts maintaining a massive $150,000 year-end target for Bitcoin.
Yeah, they're not backing down.
They are attributing this recent weakness to a short-term confidence shock rather than any structural damage to the network. And we're seeing a massive fight for mainstream adoption right in the middle of all this chaos.
We really are.
Charles Schwab is rolling out crypto trading to go head-to-head with Robinhood, while SoFi is heavily advertising access to over 25 different cryptocurrencies on their platform.
Which is wild. The traditional financial architecture is quietly building out the plumbing for crypto at a staggering pace, completely unfazed by the asset prices reacting violently to geopolitical news.
Okay, but I have to push back on a massive contradiction here.
Go for it.
We constantly hear this narrative that crypto is the ultimate hedge against the traditional financial system. It's supposed to be digital gold, right? A safe haven when governments and physical markets fail.
That's the pitch, yeah.
But the second a real-world military crisis hits and oil spikes, Bitcoin and XRP tanked, exactly like risky tech stocks.
Yeah.
So is the digital gold narrative actually dead?
Well, that is the defining question for the maturity of these assets right now. It requires us to understand how institutions categorize risk. Bitcoin and XRP are still overwhelmingly treated as high beta risk assets by the traditional financial world.
High beta, meaning they amplify whatever the broader stock market is feeling.
Yeah.
Like, if the market seizes, crypto catches a cold.
Precisely. A high beta asset moves with greater volatility than the overall market.
Right.
When a massive macro shock hits like a military blockade restricting the global oil supply, large institutional funds cannot afford to be philosophical about digital gold. They have rigid risk mandates.
They just have to act.
Right. They have to de-risk their portfolios across the board immediately. To raise cash, they sell their most liquid, most volatile assets first. That means crypto gets dumped right alongside speculative tech stocks.
Wow.
The fact that Schwab and SoFi are building the infrastructure shows the long-term thesis is alive. But in the short term, crypto does not exist in a vacuum. It is hardwired into the exact same panic button as the rest of the traditional market.
Which brings us perfectly to the institution whose entire job is to manage that panic button, the Federal Reserve.
Oh, boy.
Because when you have volatile markets, a blockade in the Middle East, and oil surging back to $95 a barrel, that inevitably leads to the word no one wants to hear, inflation.
Exactly. The through line is direct. A physical supply chain disruption in energy feeds immediately into the inflation narrative, which, dictates the cost of borrowing money.
And the Federal Reserve, the entity tasked with fighting that inflation, is currently engulfed in what can only be described as unprecedented political and legal chaos right now.
Unprecedented is the right word.
Let's look at Kevin Warsh. He is President Trump's nominee to be the next Fed chair. His early testimony for the upcoming Senate Banking Committee hearing was just released to our sources, and he is leaning heavily on two major themes.
Right.
First, he argues that inflation is a choice, and the Fed must take responsibility for it. And second, he says the central bank must stay in its lane.
Yeah, Warsh is attempting to mount a very pointed defense of the Fed's traditional role here. But using the phrase analytic rigor and unclouded decision-making, he's arguing that monetary policy should be dictated by cold, hard math, not political pressure.
Okay.
But he intentionally leaves a release valve in his testimony. He adds that central bankers must be humble enough to listen to a diversity of views, explicitly noting the views of the president.
And the president's views are not exactly a secret.
Not at all.
The political pressure here is intense. Trump publicly wants significantly lower interest rates to stimulate the economy. Meanwhile, the current Fed chair, Jerome Powell, whose term ends on May 15th, is facing massive legal threats.
Yeah, this is crazy.
The Department of Justice has actually opened a criminal investigation into Powell regarding his handling of costly renovations at the Fed's D.C. headquarters.
A criminal investigation, and the legal entanglement goes far beyond just the chairman. The president is also attempting to fire Federal Reserve Board member Lisa D. Cook.
Right.
She's currently fighting this ouster, and the case has actually escalated all the way to the Supreme Court.
Which is insane. And on top of the DOJ probe and the Supreme Court battle, you have Republican Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina publicly vowing to block any Fed nominees from advancing to a full Senate vote until these legal threats against Fed officials are dropped.
Total gridlock.
Okay, I'm struggling to square this circle. I need you to help me understand this mechanically.
I'll try.
Warsh firmly states that inflation is a choice, but the administration is demanding lower interest rates to boost the economy. Right at the exact moment oil prices are spiking due to a blockade, which inherently causes inflation.
Yeah.
It feels like the Fed is trying to tap the brakes to stop the car from overheating, but the administration is sitting in the passenger seat, pressing their foot on the accelerator. How can the Fed possibly stay in its lane without crashing straight into the White House's agenda?
Honestly, the simple answer is that they might not be able to avoid a crash.
Wow.
Mechanically, if inflation rises because oil hits $95, the Fed's standard tools to keep interest rates high. That makes borrowing more expensive, which cools down economic demand to match the restricted supply of goods.
Right, standard economics.
That is the analytic rigor Warsh is defending, but the political reality is that high interest rates are deeply unpopular. Warsh is attempting to thread an impossible needle here. He's defending the institution's independence to make the final, unpopular mathematical call while validating the administration's right to yell at them for making it.
But how does a central bank function when it is paralyzed by legal and political threats?
It struggles immensely. When you combine this ideological tightrope with a DOJ criminal investigation into the sitting chair, a Supreme Court battle over a board member, and a legislative blockade by Senator Tillis, the functional independence of the central bank is facing a stress test unlike anything in modern history.
That's terrifying.
The market relies on the Fed to be boring and predictable. Right now, it is neither.
It's a fundamental crisis of oversight and trust. And, speaking of oversight, if the Senate is tasked with vetting the integrity of the Federal Reserve, who's vetting the lawmakers?
That is a very good question.
That brings us to Capitol Hill, where Congress is facing a massive internal crisis of trust of its own.
The contrast here is fascinating. At the exact same moment the Senate is tasked with evaluating the ethics and independence of financial nominees, the House Ethics Committee is grappling with severe credibility issues of its own regarding how it polices lawmakers.
Right. We have sources detailing a very rare, unsigned statement recently issued by the House Ethics Committee defending its handling of sexual misconduct allegations.
Yeah.
And just for context for you listening, this is a highly secretive, evenly split bipartisan committee.
Very secretive.
This defensive statement comes right on the heels of two major resignations. Representative Tony Gonzalez, a Republican from Texas, and Representative Eric Swalwell, a Democrat from California, both resigned last week after facing accusations of sexual misconduct with aides.
And both of those resignations occurred under intense political pressure and bipartisan threats of expulsion. In their statement, the committee forcefully insists that there must be zero tolerance for sexual misconduct in Congress.
But then, in that very same document, the committee did something shocking. They openly admitted that their own system is broken.
Yeah, they really did.
They acknowledged that congressional staffers are likely very reluctant to bring accusations to a panel that is controlled by the lawmakers' own peers. The direct quote from the statement is stunning. They wrote, "Unfortunately, there likely exist matters never reported to the committee."
Wow.
And they went on to call their greatest hurdle the task of convincing the most vulnerable witnesses to share their stories.
I mean, for a committee that typically operates entirely behind closed doors and relies on public confidence, that admission is profound.
It really is.
They are publicly stating that their mechanism for justice is fundamentally struggling to fulfill its primary purpose.
It sounds like asking the high school football team to objectively investigate the star quarterback. Is the ethics committee basically admitting that the mechanics of self-policing are fundamentally flawed when it comes to actually protecting vulnerable staff?
They are acknowledging a massive structural paradox. The mechanics of self-policing inherently rely on a balance of power, but the power dynamic here is heavily skewed.
Yeah.
The investigators on the committee are the colleagues, friends, or political allies of the people being investigated. That creates a massive chilling effect on reporting. A system cannot effectively dispense justice if the vulnerable individuals it is meant to protect fundamentally do not trust the mechanism itself.
That makes total sense.
It is a deep asymmetry of power that leaves the staff exposed while shielding the institution.
An asymmetry of power. That dynamic isn't just a Capitol Hill problem. It's actually the exact same dynamic playing out in your web browser when you try to book a flight. Which brings us to our final source today.
A great transition.
We've talked about a lack of transparency in government and high finance. Let's talk about the corporations that seem to know everything about you, down to the exact dollar you're willing to pay to fly.
This is where macroeconomic theory meets microsurveillance. We have a fascinating incident regarding JetBlue that recently went viral and sparked a massive conversation about consumer privacy and corporate algorithms.
Right. A frustrated JetBlue customer posted on social media complaining that the price of a flight they were monitoring jumped $230 in a single day.
Which is a huge jump.
And the official JetBlue account actually responded to them directly. They told the customer that they should try clearing their browser cache and using an incognito window to find cheaper airfare.
Which is just a stunning thing for a multi-billion-dollar corporation to put in writing.
Literally tweeting the quiet part out loud.
Exactly. JetBlue later deleted the post and released a statement calling the response an employee error.
Of course they did, but consumer advocates immediately flagged this deleted post as a quiet admission of a controversial practice called surveillance pricing. What is the actual mechanism behind surveillance pricing?
So surveillance pricing is a practice where a company utilizes a user's specific personal data, their browsing history, their geographic location, their previous purchase behavior, and crucially, how many times they've checked a specific route. They use all of that to set individualized dynamic prices. The implication of the JetBlue employee telling a customer to clear their cache is that the airline's algorithm was reading the data stored on the user's computer and specifically penalizing that user for showing repeated interest.
That feels so invasive.
It is. The algorithm quantified the customer's urgency and raised the price accordingly to extract more money.
So we all accept that dynamic pricing exists in a broad sense,
Yeah.
right? Like you expect to pay more for a flight on Thanksgiving weekend than on a random Tuesday in February because demand is higher.
Sure.
But if a simple incognito mode trick to hide your identity can suddenly save you $230, are we fundamentally moving away from the concept of a fair market price to just whatever the algorithm thinks your specific panic level will tolerate?
Yes. We are seeing a quiet but massive shift from market-based pricing to behavioral-based pricing. If we look at the information asymmetry we saw in Congress, surveillance pricing is the ultimate corporate manifestation of that concept.
That's a great point.
The corporation holds all the cards. They know what you bought, when you bought it, and mathematically how desperate you are to buy it again. You, the consumer, only see the final number on the screen. The fair price becomes entirely subjective, dictated by a machine designed to extract the maximum possible dollar amount based entirely on your personal digital footprint.
Wow. Let's trace this whole journey back because the connections here are wild today.
They really are.
We started today looking at a very physical bottleneck. The U.S. Navy enforcing a blockade and firing artillery rounds into a ship's engine in the Strait of Hormuz. That physical friction instantly spiked oil prices to $95 a barrel, which triggered a digital bottleneck, crashing Bitcoin and wiping out XRP's massive weekend rally as institutions panicked.
Right.
That market volatility and inflation fear leads us straight into the gridlock at the Federal Reserve, where a new nominee is demanding the bank use analytic rigor while navigating DOJ criminal probes and Supreme Court battles.
The dominoes just keep falling.
Exactly. And that lack of institutional stability mirrors the ethical blind spots we see in Congress, where the Ethics Committee openly admits its self-policing structure is too broken to protect vulnerable witnesses. And finally, that exact same lack of transparency bleeds into your everyday life, where airline algorithms are quietly reading your browser history to squeeze an extra $230 out of your wallet based on your desperation.
It's all connected. The physical events dictate the market algorithms dictate the institutional responses, and the corporate algorithms dictate your personal choices.
Yeah.
Which leaves us with a totally new, slightly terrifying question to consider. If algorithms are already tracking our behavior to price gauge us based on our personal panic, and geopolitical trading algorithms are triggering massive crypto sell-offs in milliseconds based on oil spikes, well, what happens when those corporate algorithms start communicating directly with the geopolitical ones?
Oh, wow.
Are we moving toward a future where a fired missile in the Middle East automatically raises the price of your Uber to the airport before the news alert even breaks on your phone? Who is actually making the decisions anymore? Are you in control of your choices, or are you just reacting to the machine reading your cache?
It definitely makes you look at your browser cache a little differently, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time to unpack the next big, complex story. Until then,